Have you ever had a really great idea, and you thought it was a really great idea, and you went full steam ahead on your great idea, and you realized your idea was not that great? That's pretty much how I live my day-to-day life. When I was in college, I actually had a streak of really, really not so great ideas. You see, my friends invited me to play intramural soccer with them. And they knew that I had played soccer for like 10 years of my life, and I was pretty good at it. What I didn't know is that they were on a co-ed team. So what this means is that you have to have 2 girls on the field at all times. So there's 7 players on each team. 2 of them have to be girls. What happens in co-ed soccer is that nobody passes to the girl. They're just kind of there so that way the team doesn't get disqualified. And so for this whole year, I'm playing for the soccer team, and I got stuck at like left defense, so like the ball never goes there. And I would just play my heart out, never touching the ball, just hoping maybe one day that my teammates would pass to me. Do this for a whole year, never happens. The next year they come back like, Emily, are you gonna be on our soccer team again? I'm like, yeah, totally, because I'm convinced they're gonna pass me the ball this time. Another year goes by, I don't get past the ball. It's my 3rd year, and they're like, Emily, like, we really need another girl for the team. Like, you gotta play. I'm like, I never get past the ball. I don't wanna do this, but this year's gonna be different. I'm gonna make sure it's different. So I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna play. Well, that year was different for sure, because the intramural sports committee changed some of the rules on who was allowed to play for this team. Usually, college athletes are not allowed to play intramural sports. But this final year that I was there, they decided that a college athlete can play an intramural sport as long as it's the one that they don't get scholarship money to play for. Meaning that the entire football team signed up to play co-ed intramural soccer. And so now I'm playing soccer against people that are 6'5", and I'm like 5'4" on a good day, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is like 200 pounds of muscle, and like, I am not muscle at all, and I'm just trying to figure out, like, I don't know what to do. My teammates still are not passing me the ball at all, but then one day, I was like, oh man, I think we could do this. You see, the playoffs are coming up. Historically, our team had been so bad that we never even made it to the playoffs, but this one day, I was like, man, I think we could actually do it. But there's kind of a problem. I bruise pretty easily, and so I had been kind of unaware of some of the injuries that I had been tacking up from all of my collisions with the football team, and it was finally warm enough that we could wear shorts outside, and so I go to class one day, and I'm just like wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and I have a professor pull me aside, because just on my left leg I had 13 bruises, and she's like, Emily, like, what happened to you? I was like, yeah, I'm playing co-ed intramural soccer, like, totally chill. She's like, no, I think you should like sit this game out. I'm like, no, I'm completely fine. It'll be great. Like, we have the playoffs tonight. I have to be there. The team is counting on me. They're not counting on me, but I need to be there. And she's like, okay, well, be careful. And this happens a little bit throughout the day until finally I'm walking out of class. I'm headed to the rec center, and I see my friend Jacob, and Jacob stops me, and he's like, Emily, what happened to your legs? I'm like, intramural soccer, man, it's just pretty intense. You know, the football team's there, but I'm just really good and carrying the team on my shoulders. And he's like, Emily, I just really don't think you should be playing tonight. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's the playoffs. Like, I have to be there. If I'm not there, like, the team gets disqualified. And he's like, I just feel like you're gonna get hurt, and I don't think that you should play tonight. I'm like, Jacob, I think I know what's best for my body. I think I know that what I can handle. I think I'm gonna play tonight because I wanna make sure that my team wins. And he's like, okay, like, you go play. So I show up to this game, and it was like the stars aligned. You see, we're in the second half, we're tied like 1-1, and there's 15 minutes left on the clock, and somehow someone on my team does like this horrific pass, like the worst pass I've ever seen in my life, but the ball somehow ends up between me, the defender from the other team, and a wide open goal. And I'm like, oh my goodness. This is my shot. Like, this is when I get to prove to the team that, like, I actually know what I'm doing. I'm gonna, like, get the ball around this one defender, and I'm gonna make a goal, and they're gonna, like, carry me on their shoulders, and, like, we're gonna win the championship, and it's gonna be everything. And I had this idea in my head of how this is all gonna play out, so I go full steam ahead on this ball. Now, this defender, he's the kicker for the football team. He is 6'5". He's really tall. He's really ginormous. He's also going full steam ahead on this ball, and we hit the ball at the same time. Our feet sandwich it together, but you see, the way that physics works is that the momentum still kept happening, and so I keep going forward, he keeps going forward, we collide into each other, he collides into my knee goes this way, and the rest of my body goes that way. And I am on the floor of the gym. I'm like, Emily, you cannot cry right now. You cannot cry right now. And I just all I want to do is cry because I'm in so much pain, but there's 15 minutes left on the clock. I have to keep playing, otherwise my team gets disqualified. So I was like, all right, I'll just keep playing. So for 15 more minutes, I keep running on this injured knee. The game ends and I hobble back to my dorm. I'm in so much pain. I wake up the next morning and my knee is completely purple and my foot is now also completely purple. I go to the health clinic and they're like, you need to go to the ER. So I end up at the ER. The ER sends me to an orthopedic specialist. I found out that I had partially torn my meniscus. And so I got to finish the last 2 weeks of my senior year of college on crutches. And I just remember that moment. I was like, man, my friend Jacob, he's going to say I told you so. He's going to make fun of me. And I was really nervous. And I remember going into class, and I'm trying to crutch with a backpack, and it's really hard. And he saw me, and he didn't say I told you so. He said, hey, can I carry your books for you? And it was just this moment where I was like, man, I have a really good friend. And when I think about how I get to be here, how I get to be a pastor, it's really not because I studied. It's not because I got a degree. It's honestly been because of the people that were willing to encourage and share the truth when I needed it. And when I think of my friends and when I think of the people I trust, it's usually the people that were willing to tell me the hard things and to walk with me through those hard things. And that's kind of our big idea for today, that friends love each other enough to speak the truth even when it's hard. The people we trust the most are the ones who are willing to speak the truth even when we don't want to hear it, and even when we sometimes don't agree with it. And this is what we're hearing about today through 2 Samuel chapter 12. And if you have your Bible, I invite you to open there. And as you do, I'm going to give you a little bit of context from chapter 11. You see, David has been made king. He's been reigning for a while. But in chapter 11, his story takes a bit of a turn. And we read this really interesting phrase in chapter 11, verse 1. It says, in the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent Joab out with the king's men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained in Jerusalem. Now, this seems like a lot of big names and everything. But what this verse reveals is that something isn't right. It says, in the spring, at the time when kings go off to war, David sent someone else. David stayed in Jerusalem. David didn't go off to war. We see that David is in the wrong place at the wrong time. He should be at war, but instead he is home. If we continue reading, we see that David ends up hanging out on his roof, and he sees a woman bathing. And instead of turning around, David continues to gaze, and he continues to watch. David engages in lust, and he begins to long to use a person for his own satisfaction. David orders his servants to find out who this woman is and to bring her to the castle. The servants go out, and they find out that this woman's name is Bathsheba, and they bring her into the castle, and David ends up sleeping with her. David knows that she has a wife, or that she has a husband. Her husband's name is Uriah, yet David still plans to use her to satisfy his own desires. And then David sends her away. But the story doesn't end here, because Bathsheba ends up becoming pregnant. David thought that he could sleep with Bathsheba in private, but with her pregnancy, the sin is now coming to light. And so David tries to do everything he can to hide it. He ends up calling Uriah back from war, so that way he could go sleep with Bathsheba, and then it would look like it was actually Uriah's kid. So David tries to manipulate Uriah in a couple of different situations, but Uriah doesn't do it. Uriah is a man of honor. It doesn't feel right to him that he should go be sleeping with his wife when everybody else he knows is on the front lines. And so as Uriah refuses multiple times, David orders the general of the army to put Uriah on the front line. David organizes a scheme to make sure that Uriah gets positioned and abandoned on the front lines, left to fend for himself, and he ultimately dies, all so that David can cover up his adultery. David has been scheming in secret to get what he wanted and to preserve himself. And we read at the very end of chapter 11, it says, when Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. After the time of mourning was over, David had her brought to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing David had done displeased the Lord. You see, the thoughts and actions of David Though they were done in secret, they were never hidden from the Lord. Yet David chooses to keep hiding. David chooses to not confess his sin. And in doing so, David experiences separation from God. Yet God, in his mercy, doesn't leave David like this. God sends a friend to David, and this is where we pick up in chapter 12. We read in chapter 12, verse 1, "The Lord sent Nathan to David." These are 6 small words, but I think they speak such loud volumes because it reminds us that God isn't blind to who we are. He's not blind to what we've done or even what's been done to us. And it reminds us that one of the ways that God brings healing is actually through his people. It's this amazing and beautiful verse until you put yourself in Nathan's shoes. Because imagine you're Nathan, and David's your friend, but David is also one of the most powerful men in the world. David is also king, and the way it works is when you're a king, if you don't like someone's advice, you can pretty much do whatever you want to the person who gave you that advice. It's a little bit risky, and you're friends, but if David doesn't like what Nathan says, Nathan is at the mercy of David. So the Lord calls Nathan to go to David, but Nathan doesn't even have the assurance of how David is going to respond. Yet we see that Nathan still chooses to go, and he chooses to enter David's story. And this shows us that real friends join the mess. Real friends don't just stand on the sidelines. They don't watch from afar. Real friends step into the mess, and this is what Nathan does. He goes to David fully prepared to step into David's shame, David's isolation, his brokenness, but also his restoration. And part of my job down in Brookings is I get to hang out a lot with our college and young adult students. And friendship is always something that's a topic, because for the first time in their life, they're learning how to make friends. And one of the verses that I love to remind them of is this really random proverb. It says, "Where there are no oxen, the manger is empty, but from the strength of an ox come abundant harvest." And I'm going to be honest, I do not come from an agriculture background, and so I'll do my best. If I say anything wrong about agriculture, please correct me. But this verse is a reminder that if we want to see growth, if we want to see harvest, if we want to see healing and redemption, we have to be willing to step into the mess. I have never been around an actual ox, but I'm pretty sure they don't smell great. I'm pretty sure an ox just kind of goes to the bathroom wherever it wants to go, and then it makes you pick up its mess, and it kind of, just does whatever it wants. It makes a mess wherever it wants. But this is what I do know. I don't think we get the same amount of harvest if we try and do everything ourselves. If we choose to not have the ox, then we're not going to get the results that we need. In the biblical context, before machineries and tractors, without an ox, you would not have the strength or resources to harvest. And there come times in our relationships with others where we see the mess in someone else. We see what's happening. And man, I don't really want to get in that. But this is what I do know. When we want to miss out on the mess, we miss out on the opportunity to witness our friends being transformed. We miss out on the opportunity of witnessing our friends being healed. And so Nathan chooses to enter David's mess. And Nathan isn't promised an outcome. He's not promised whether David will even listen to him, but he still goes. And upon entering the mess, he then uses wisdom and discernment to address David and what he's done. If we keep reading, we get to hear what Nathan ends up saying to David. When Nathan came to him, he said, "There were 2 men in a certain town, one rich and the other poor. The rich man had a very large number of sheep and cattle, but the poor man had nothing except one little ewe lamb he had bought. He raised it, and it grew up with him and his children. It shared his food, drank from his cup, and even slept in his arms. It was like a daughter to him. Now a traveler came to the rich man, but the rich man refrained from taking one of his own sheep or cattle to prepare for a meal for the traveler who had come to him. Instead, he took the ewe lamb that belonged to the poor man and prepared it for the one who had come to him." David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, "As surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity." Notice how Nathan starts his conversation. Nathan starts with a purposeful story. Nathan doesn't come in with a pointed finger and a voice of shame. But Nathan also doesn't ignore the issue. Nathan is neither aggressive in his approach, he's also not passive. Rather, Nathan is purposeful. And we see that friends tell the truth with wisdom and grace, and this is what Nathan is doing with David. Nathan does not seek to win an argument. Rather, he seeks to usher his friend towards the healing power of God, and he does this by telling a story. And what I love about this is that God has crafted our brains in a beautiful and just such a marvelous way. I think the brain is one of the most amazing parts of our bodies, but there's two sections in our brain, the lower brain and the upper brain. The lower section of our brain is where we experience emotion. The upper section of our brain is where we get to process our thoughts and reason and use logic. The tricky thing is that when we are in emotional distress, we can't access the part of our brain that uses reason and logic. So that means when we enter someone else's mess, there's a really good chance they're not able to access the part of their brain that they can use logic and reasoning to communicate with us. And I think we've all experienced this. Like what Nathan is doing with a story is that he's understanding that David might not be able to receive deep and rational thoughts right now. Nathan knows David well enough that he starts with what David can mentally and emotionally process, and it's a symbolic story. It's a story about a rich man abusing his power to get what he wants. It's a story about someone with wealth and resources taking from someone who is lacking and from someone who is struggling to survive. And we see that David is so angry that the rich man would do this, and it reveals that even in David's state, he still understands what justice and mercy is. And so Nathan's story is not a random story. It's the image of what God's justice and mercy looks like. It's a reminder and a calling to remember that God cares about the least, the last, the lost, and the left out. Nathan purposely shares this story to reveal the character of God and how God entrusts the rich to care for the poor. But Nathan doesn't stop here. He doesn't leave it as a symbol. He doesn't leave it as this abstract story. Nathan is willing to get very specific about the mess that David is in. And in verse 7, Nathan responds to David. Nathan said to David, "You are that man. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house to you, and your master's wives into your arms. I gave you all Israel and Judah, and if all this had been too little, I would have given you even more. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? You struck down Uriah the Hittite with a sword and took his wife to be your own. You killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own. This is what the Lord says. Out of your own household I am going to bring calamity on you. Before your very eyes I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will sleep with your wives in broad daylight. You did it in secret, but I will do this thing in broad daylight before all Israel." Nathan is bold enough to be specific to his friend, and David is humble enough to receive correction. And what we see in this moment is that friends actually grow when they're willing to be honest with each other. And we live in a world where it's so easy to be superficial. 99% of the time when someone asks, "How are you?" you're probably lying. We just gut reaction say "I'm good, I'm great." It's really hard for us to enter those moments to actually say how we are. We are so afraid to be honest with others, but in doing so, we miss out on what God does when Christian friends carry one another's burdens. And if you were to look at the first step of any 12 steps or addictions recovery program, the first step is always admitting there's a problem. The first step is always the honesty about who you are and where you're at. Because it's when we're finally honest, when we finally see ourselves for who we are, we realize that we need God to do a very deep and transforming work within us. And there are a lot of days where I am like David. There are a lot of days where I don't see it in myself, and I need my friends to say, "Emily, the joke you made was actually hurtful. Emily, I know you're tired, but you're not listening right now." I need people in my life that help me honestly see who I am. And if I'm being honest, I don't like it when they tell that to me. I don't like those moments. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to address it. But this is what I do know. When I have a friend that is willing to tell me these hard things, I know I can really trust that friend. I know that friend, that's going to be the person I call when I'm in trouble. That's going to be the person I call when I'm confused. That's also going to be the person I call when I get to celebrate something. Because this person cares about me enough to let me know when I'm living life out of step with what God has for me. And in the same way, when I choose to sit down with one of my friends and tell them the truth, it's really hard. It's really uncomfortable. But they get to know that I care about them enough that I'm not going to let them keep making choices that are not in step with God's heart. I'm going to tell them the truth because I want more for them. I want them to be someone that boldly represents who Jesus is. I want them to experience the fullest relationship with God as possible. Friends grow with one another when they're willing to be honest, when they're willing to share and provide insight on how we can keep pursuing Jesus, how we can keep modeling his love and his mercy, and along the way being transformed by his Spirit. And it's in this chapter that we get to see the beauty of what happens in this conversation. In verse 13, we read that then David said to Nathan, "I have sinned against the Lord." Nathan replied, "The Lord has taken away your sin. You're not going to die. But because by doing this, you have shown utter contempt for the Lord, the son born to you will die." What we see is that Nathan actually was able to lead David to a moment where he could confess. Nathan was able to lead David to a moment where he could find freedom from his sin and a right relationship with God. We see that God uses our honest friends to draw us closer to him. And there's a famous pastor from World War II, and he wrote this book called Life Together, but his name is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And he grew up, he was in Germany, he was a pastor there, but he ended up moving to England, and he started a radio broadcast that was calling out what the Nazis were doing to the church in Germany. They were abusing the religion in order to support their own regime. Yet, Bonhoeffer felt called to go back to live in Germany in order to support local pastors. And he wrote this book about what it was like to live with them, and it's called Life Together. But he writes this whole section about how Christian community must include Christians who confess to one another. And I hear that, I'm like, no thanks, I'm good. I'll just tell God about my sins, it'll be between me and him, and we'll be good. But listen to what Bonhoeffer says. He says, "Why is it often easier for us to confess our sins to God than to a brother? God is holy and sinless. He is a just judge of evil and the enemy of all disobedience. But a brother is as sinful as we are. He knows from his own experience the dark night of secret sin. Why should we not find it easier to go to a brother than to the holy God? But if we do, we must ask ourselves whether we have not often been deceiving ourselves with our confession of sin to God, whether we have not rather been confessing our sins to ourselves and also granting ourselves absolution. Who can give us a certainty that in the confession and in the forgiveness of sins, we are not dealing with ourselves, but with the living God? God gives us a certainty through our brother. Our brother breaks the circle of self-deception. A man who confesses his sins in the presence of a brother knows that he is no longer alone with himself. He experiences the presence of God and the reality of the other person. When we confess to a friend, we speak the grievous ways our hearts, our thoughts, and our deeds were not in line with who God is. When we confess to a friend, we have to verbally name our offenses. Yet, when we confess to a friend, we verbally hear the pardon of God. When we confess the dirty, grimy, messy parts of our lives, and our friend remains there, looking at us in love, not ashamed of us, we find that this is how the Father still looks at us. Confession is scary because we are people who enjoy hiding. Yet confession is how friends help each other find freedom. Nathan ushers David into a moment of freedom. Nathan gets to proclaim the truth of God's mercy, that David's sins are forgiven. And as Nathan looks at David with eyes of love, eyes that are not ashamed of David, eyes that want more for David, David gets to see just how much more the Father looks at him in love. Friends love each other enough to speak the truth. They love each other enough to enter the mess, to speak with wisdom and grace, and to remind each other of God's mercy, his forgiveness, and his freedom. Which leads us with one last question. How do we become people that model this well? I think the first way that we do this is through prayer. Before, during, and after a conversation, it has to be prayer. And whenever I have these conversations, I'll find a place right before to settle my heart. I really don't like confrontation. I would much rather sweep it under a rug and pretend it didn't happen. And so confrontation is really scary for me. Having these conversations is really hard, but when I enter that conversation before having prayed, I remember that this is an opportunity where I get to step into the work that God has already initiated and that God has already started. I get to bring the anxiety of all of the what if questions of like, man, what if this doesn't go the way I want it to? I get to bring that to God. And when I start in prayer, I usually end up seeing during the conversation where God is at work. And then when I leave that conversation and pray again, I have all those like, man, I should have said this differently. This didn't go the way I wanted it to. I get to rest in knowing that God is going to continue doing a work in this person, even where my words and my actions might have fallen short. I think the second way that we do this well is we speak truth with love and not pride. It's really easy for me to try and win an argument. It's really easy for me to try and prove that my thoughts are right. But when we enter into these conversations, our goal isn't to fix people. Our goal is to help our friends see that they're made for more. Our goal is to help our friends see that God has dreams and desires for them beyond our imagination, that God desires more for them. Third, we have to model this first. We have to be willing to receive correction. And I think friendship is a two-way street. We can't just expect someone else to be humble enough to receive what we have. We also have to be willing to step into humility and receive what our friends have to say. But when we model humility first, it's contagious. It changes our relationships. And lastly, when it's possible, we stay close after the conversation. My friend Jacob, when I showed up to class with crutches, he didn't just say, I told you so, and leave me on my own. He said, hey, how can I help you? He stayed close, and he helped me those last 2 weeks. And not every conversation that you have is going to be great. Our friends have the ability to hurt us. We're people. We hurt each other with our own brokenness. And there are times when it's appropriate to set boundaries. Yet, when it's possible, we get to stay close. And when we do that, we get to witness what God is doing in someone else's life. We get to be in the front row seat of healing and redemption and transformation. Would you guys be willing to pray with me? God, we thank you for community. We thank you for our friends. We thank you for your word that gives us instruction on how to have hard conversations, on how to step into the messiness, and how to be a people that are passionate about your work, a people that are passionate about your redeeming power and its ability and its present work right now in the people we love. And so we ask that as we go this week that you would equip us to be people who boldly step in to speak truth with wisdom and grace. And in the moments where we feel anxious and nervous, that you would remind us that your Spirit is with us, that we can trust you, that there's a work that you have started, and there's a work that you have completed. We love you and we praise you. Amen.